polished and smooth. Polished better than ropey and acutely vague.
Well, we are now into the speeches portion of our meeting, and I think we can all agree that there's that Rubicon that you cross in Toastmasters, which is the icebreaker speech. Once you give the icebreaker, it's downhill from there.
Oh yeah, I agree with that.
Can you help the Toastmaster out here?
What's a Rubicon? Is that the game?
It's a point of no return. It's a Rubik's Cube. Rubicon is the point of no return. The point of irrevocability.
Napoleon is Rubicon.
Well, our first speech tonight will be our fellow Toastmaster, Brian, and his speech is his icebreaker. Please welcome Brian.
Well, while I was researching some topics for my speech and trying to figure out what I was going to talk about exactly, I came across some old articles, like some of the remaining articles on Steve Jobs after he had retired for the second time, like Michael Jordan. And I came across a speech that he gave at Stanford University, the graduating class there. If you get a chance to check it out, Google it, Steve Jobs, Stanford speech. It's really interesting. It's got a great story. But one part stuck out to me in particular. And he said, you'll never be able to connect the dots looking forward. It's always looking back that you connect the dots. And his point was, you'll never be able to plan out exactly how things work. And looking back on things, you can always put together how the path turned out. And if you know his story, his path went all around. I'm sure you probably have something like that, where you look back at a job, you never would have pictured how you landed in the job you're at, or how you met your spouse or an important friend. And it's just like, oh, I never would have planned that. That is interesting. One of the things, looking back on how I got here, that impacted me as much as anything that I never would have expected is the obscure sport of rowing. So I started rowing actually in high school. And through middle school, I had played soccer, and I was always pretty mediocre. And going into high school, I was never going to be able to make the high school team. So I was a little bit, you're devastated at that time. Big crisis. My younger brother was much better than me at soccer, and I didn't know what I was going to do. If I was just going to drop sports altogether, or if I was, what was going to happen. And my friend told me that you could get a college scholarship really easily if you rowed. Not many high schools had it. It was a great way to get a scholarship. So what he hadn't told me at the time, and this is what comes back to never understanding how things are going to work out, is that to get one of those scholarships, you have to be big and tall. And I was neither of those. There's no chance I was ever going to get a scholarship. But that was the hook that sank me, so I rowed throughout high school. And then applying to college, it wasn't on my top priority. It was a big part of my high school experience, but it wasn't a priority for me to row. I wanted to go into engineering and find the best engineering school I could get into, which turned out to be the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And they had a club rowing team. So just about the last minute, I decided I was going to row in college, which turned out to be a great decision, because when you go to such a big school, it's hard to make a social network unless you have something that can shrink it down. You have 40,000 people there, and how are you going to make close friends unless you have some kind of close connection? So I joined the rowing team there, and I'll come back to it a little bit in a little bit, but the biggest impact was my social network. Some of the other things I learned while I was rowing that I've taken with me throughout all my careers is discipline. So waking up in the morning, 5:30 in the morning, when I could be just sleeping in and waiting for class, doing something I didn't necessarily always want to do, as hard as I could possibly do it, and just Rowing's a funny sport because it's a lot like running. You're doing something over and over again, a very repetitive motion, so it takes a lot of discipline just to work through that. I also learned an important lesson. Besides doing something I didn't always want to do, was doing something I loved doing. And the way rowing is set up, there's no glory, there's absolutely no money in rowing, there's no professional advancement. You could only row if you just loved doing it. And I love rowing. I love getting out on the water, and just the feeling of being out in the water. I'm sure you have something like that. If you knit or if you read, you can probably understand the feeling I get when I'm in a boat. And the biggest impact rowing had was my social network. So the friends I have today, it's the reason I moved to Chicago, was to live with a couple of friends that had rowed, and I came here and got a job in engineering. And I've maintained those friends. Now they have, some of them have children and they're married, and I'm still friends with all those people. I see them on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. And I also met my wife through rowing. So she was a coxswain on the men's team, and I got to meet her, and of course that's had a major impact on my life. And the latest lesson, I'm always surprised what I go back to and what I think about and what I've learned. And the latest lesson that I've learned through rowing is what I talked about originally, that you'll never understand how things work out until you look back. And that day that I joined in high school, I never would have pictured that all the way to now I'd still be rowing, that I'd have my social network and such an impact through the sport.
Brian, we share an alma mater. When did you graduate?
In 2000.
Okay, you're a little older than me, no shame in that. Very good speech, thank you very much.